All right, well, welcome. As Shahab said, Kevin Carney, Austin Smith. We'll get our profiles in just a second, but we are with a software development firm in Charlotte called Kingsman Software. We are in beautiful Camp North End. We've been around for 10, 11 years. We do a lot of work with a lot of big banking companies in town. We came from the big banking, so we build enterprise quality software for financial services, banking financial services type companies. 4 or 5 months ago, we sold Kingsman to SPARQ because Kingsman is a very Charlotte-centric company. There's a lot of banks in Charlotte, so it's been an all-you-can-eat buffet a little bit for the past 10 years. But SPARQ has a more nationwide presence. They have development centers in Latin America as well, and so it affords us a lot more opportunities to be nationwide. And on the other side, it allows SPARQ the deep banking and financial services capabilities that we have, and also our GenAI capabilities. I do want to point out that, as you guys I'm sure know, there's two major categories of AI with machine learning and GenAI. SPARQ actually has a lot of machine learning capabilities on their side. That's not really our expertise, so we do a lot of work in the GenAI and have done that for a couple of years now. We are trying to make sure we tailor this to what you want to understand, what you want to hear, and also to your level. I think you guys we're expecting a ton of grad students. It looks like we have more professors here, so we'll try to up it a notch and show you what we've been using for software development. We've done we're kind of partners in crime here, Austin and I. How many sessions? At least 6 or 7?
Probably 6, 7, yeah.
Yeah. We record them. They're on a YouTube site. If you go to the Kingsman Software YouTube site, you'll see a lot of our, we call AI in action sessions, monthly speaking series. And our goal with these speaking series is to show AI being used, hence the name AI in action. Because we've been in a lot of panel conversations and we talk about it and we pontificate. But we think that showing it is just helps people understand the material a little bit better. And also talking about it and seeing it in action, like that's a whole lot different. Like you get amazed.
Yeah, and also depending on what your career aspirations are after you graduate, this will kind of give you an idea of like if you want to go into more of like a software engineering route, how you would actually use it in your day-to-day as an engineer.
Yep.
Because it's changed the way our engineers work.
We have probably 100 different slides and probably over 100 slides. And how many demos? 50 demos? We'll see that just doing that. But so we're trying to pull those slides and demos that would make most sense for the audience here today. So
it's going to be a broad range of topics.
But how you use it in development, as opposed to business use cases that like a bank might use AI because they might use it differently for their customers versus how they use it internally to build software. The two of us, so I'm a client partner. I was one of the partners at Kingsman. I don't normally wear a suit. We are normally snarky t-shirts, but because we're a software dev shop. But I'm gonna actually have a conference today, so I was dressed up for that.
We're usually shorts and t-shirts.
Yeah, so. Yeah, it was cold today though, right?
I walked in and everyone was like, "You're dressed up," and I was like, "Yeah, got to talk today."
But Austin here is the techie guy. He's the smart one. He's the one that actually builds a lot of these things. I am just the good-looking one that does all the presentations. So
questionable.
Questionable?
Yeah, questionable.
Better look. Yeah, okay. Well, he's got jeans, so it's conflicting. He's got a suit coat, he's got jeans. But just the point that if we have technical questions, we can ask Austin. If we have like more business questions that how would a bank use it, how would a company use it, I can answer a lot of those. It also shows that the AI that we're going to show you is not just being used for developers, it's also being used for like business analysts as well.
Yeah.
Because
it's used across our company in all different roles.
Yeah, because where I can help on the development side and give that to Austin, it allows him to focus on more important challenges. All right, so we're going to show you at least 5 tools. Some we built, like this first one we built. These other ones we leverage. You don't need to start like building all sorts of models in order to do this. A lot of these things are off the shelf. But we'll go through, actually show demos. Now, demos, you never know whether they're going to work or not. So we have what we call the turkey in the oven. Think of these cooking shows where you baste the turkey and then you put it in the oven and you say cook for 3 hours. And then there's another oven where you open it up and you pull the turkey out. So we've got those backups if internet craps out on us or we can't get to the actual site a lot. We do a lot of work with large enterprises and a lot of things are blocked. We checked this just before. We hope it'll work, but who knows? And then we can do some Q&A. All right, before we do that, the first thing I'm going to show you is our demo site. You see this is still not branded SPARQ. This is more Kingsman. But we had so many demos that you can see I've got a couple of tabs up there right now. I have like 50 tabs on some of my browser windows of all the demos I could show depending upon the situation. And it was getting crazy. And then when my Chrome crashed, it all had to figure it out. So we built a portal that just shows all the stuff that we could demo. And we selected some of those. And
We built this explicitly for Kevin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because
Basically, all the demos he used to show, we would combine them into a site. And we would actually use this when we were in sales meetings with clients as a way to show them so conceptually what they could actually have if they went with us.
And so, we categorize a little bit to show, if you want to look for things where you're building out code or you want to create images or you want to create audio, you can pick the ones you want to go demo.
This was also where we started getting very experimental. We were typically staying in the GenAI realm, but we started actually diving into some computer vision. I don't know if I don't know what you're dabbling with in your free time, but Coach AI was computer vision. So that was around actually analyzing like a baseball swing or like a golf swing to try to give you analysis on either how terrible it was or how good it was, and to kind of give you pointers on how you could be better. So a lot of these were geared towards kind of what we were seeing in the industry. So we were kind of using that to leverage sales.
Yep. These are things that we've built. And then we also just kind of link things of other capabilities that we could use or leverage or have seen in the marketplace. I think we have at least 50 when you add them all up, we have like 50 or so. Some you'll see, right? You probably know Dolly and Claude and ChatGPT, of course, but you might not know things like Devin or Gamma or Character AI, things like that. And we're going to show Cursor as one of them.
Has anybody used Cursor before? So if you code often, Cursor is going to be like the best thing you're going to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're gonna be very excited to see it.
Yeah, like I'm sure you guys have used GitHub Copilot. It looks like autocorrect. Like it's nothing compared to this. So let's jump in here and show the first thing. We're a PowerPoint shop and now we're using Google Slides, so I need to know how to dish PowerPoint up there. All right. So the first thing we do is we build our own custom GPT. You can do this with ChatGPT. You can create your own custom GPT, because before you start building software, the first thing you do is figure out what do you want to build, right? The old measure twice, cut once effect. Or if you're going to build a house for someone, you want to sit down with that person and understand what they want to build before you start architecting, before you start actually building. And so we have a process we call the Kingsman Way, and we incorporated that into Agility, where you can say, I want to go build something. I want to create an application. I'm a venture capital firm that invests in startup companies. I have funds, and funds invest in companies. Investors invest in funds or companies, blah, blah, blah. I want to track all this stuff. We said, great, here's our 7-step process. It's an interactive back and forth, understanding what you want to build. We're going to figure out some brainstorming, do some objectives, key results. How do you know that you're successful? And then we do some more technical things, domain-driven design and whatnot. And that turns into actual artifacts that are domain-driven design, building out SQL statements to actually create your database tables and actually creating your class files.
Yeah. And admittedly, when the custom GPTs first became a thing, I was skeptical on the value of them until we actually took how we delivered software and actually prompted our custom GPT around that. And when we were able to get our analysts to gather requirements faster for clients, you immediately saw the value.
Yeah.
Because before, they would just have to know the process. And it was a 100+ PowerPoint deck that they would go through all the time. And now they could, in natural language, just ask whatever question they needed to and get back what they wanted.
If we use this house analogy of, I want to go build a house, it would ask you questions like, well, how big of a house do you want? And how many stories do you want? And is it going to be in the mountains, or is it going to be in the beach, or is it going to be in the suburbs, or is it going to be in the city? Like you would want something to go through that and at least prompt people with what questions they should be thinking about so they can start answering that. And you might need to refine it, but you get 80% of the way there.
Yeah, because our typical process when we would go into a new client for any sort of software build was we'd have a discovery phase, which was basically where we were gathering all the requirements for them, so we know what we were actually building in the first place. That was historically taking us 3 to 6 months to gather all of that. I think we went down to 2 to 6 weeks with being able to just have tooling sort of help us scaffold out all of the foundational material. A huge increase for us.
So this is just ChatGPT. You can create your own custom GPT, loading in your information. And now I did this just last night, just to make sure it's still working here. But you can see how we start out the same sort of way. I'm not going to repeat this one because it takes a few minutes to actually run. So you can see that here's doing some brainstorming. Here's some initial thoughts. You probably want 3 or 4 different entities. You want to consider the ability to track individuals, aggregated investments, fund performances, things along those lines. I just said continue, and I kept going down this path. Can you elaborate on the specific pain points or inefficiencies you're seeing? I didn't respond to a lot of these, but you could. And then if I scroll down, look at my scroll window here, my slider. It's a lot. It is a lot of information we went through. And then we started creating these class diagrams in Mermaid.js. And then I just took this class diagram, copy that code, went over into my Mermaid. And if I just paste that in, it creates a diagram for me that I can now manipulate and modify. So you can see that one investor makes investments into a fund. The fund receives investments. The investor might directly invest in a company, et cetera. And we can start tweaking it from there.
I mean, has anybody ever had to sort of model out a design for software you're going to build? It's very tedious, especially when you get into an enterprise level where you're building massive systems. Being able to just plug in and just get exactly what you need, even if it's not perfect, it's scaffolding out your starting point. It saves you so much time, so much time. Because that discovery phase I was talking about, that's when we would do most of this work. So that's how we were able to cut it down so much.
And the next step was use cases. Yeah. There's a little bit of workflow here, right? It is, but we have found in our development, like everyone wants to go right to development. Everyone wants to start coding. You're like, what do you want to build? I don't know yet. Just start coding. Like, all right, well, we have a go back to the snarky t-shirts. We have a snarky t-shirt that said, weeks of coding can save you hours of planning. And the sarcasm there is that spend a few hours planning what you want to build and then start coding. So weeks of coding can save you hours of planning, which makes no sense. So, but so if we talk about this domain model as an example, and this might get into a little bit of theory versus AI, but it's a really long cord, but not long enough, huh?
Design before code.
Yeah, see? Yeah, exactly. But to be able to do these domain models, to be able to do these use case diagrams and things along those lines, requires some expertise to know how to do that. And there's a little bit of the client looking at us and saying, this is hokum, I've not heard of it before. Like, well, the computer's doing it, so it must be a standard. Like, oh, okay, it's a standard. But these domain models, this right here, we have found this to be the most the most valuable artifact in being able to build out software than process flows, screen mocks, or things along those lines. Knowing what your entities are and how they relate to each other is the most important part in our mind.
I've also seen companies that are doing custom GPTs around just acronyms for their companies, which if you've interned or had any jobs at any large American corporation, they're just acronym heavy. And just being able to ask, hey, what's this? What's that? What's this? And being able to get that without having to go to some reference diagram or document. It's things like that that help you tremendously.
Like nomenclature.
Yep.
So we also did use cases. I'm sure you guys do use cases. And so we created the use cases here. In fact, it created it for us. And that also turns into a use case diagram, which you can see here. If I can zoom in on it. Right, so an investor is going to view their portfolio, they're going to analyze their returns and receive notifications. Again, just more soft skills up front, but it does turn into some sort of code that gives you a starting point. If I scroll down a little bit further, doing some t-shirt sizing to estimate the actual effort. Then it's building a roadmap with multiple different phases.
And all of these things are necessary because without us knowing what the body of work looks like in the first place, it's very difficult from an engineering perspective to give how large and how long it's going to take to build the body of work. And we're directly billing clients based on that. So you're giving very inaccurate estimates when you don't know how large things are.
Okay.
Yeah, so, that part where you may say that on drawing, when you the generation that drawing, that's Chinese.
It'll be a mix. It depends on what we're trying to diagram. GPT is really good at spitting out mermaid JS diagrams. I've gotten it to give me the scaffolding for some like UML diagrams, but I typically have to go in and then fill in the pieces.
We will take some, and I think our next demo is showing drawing things on a whiteboard and turn that into artifacts.
Mhm.
But this is giving us the UML that we can then, or sorry, the JS. Oops, there we go. Am I still sharing the right thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, the interesting thing also is the cost. So if they alluded to that they ask the software how much time it's going to take, and you see the table, it shows you the units, the work units. This is something we don't technically learn.
Yeah, the t-shirt sizing. Yeah.
As a software developer, even when I was in college, and I don't think we do that here, we don't teach you how much this piece of software is going to cost.
Yeah.
And indirectly we do, but we don't, it's not in place, but.
In the industry, they don't either.
So they, yeah.
Yeah.
So the client talks to them, and then they're waiting for an estimate. Whatever, you know, resources.
Yeah.
And that business, which is.
Yeah. By the way, we could have an entirely full session on that in the theory behind estimations.
And the thing is, the numbers that you saw up there, those are our numbers. So across the industry, everybody will have, it's almost a joke how everybody will have a different standard on what X means versus Y. So that's why being able to have a place where we can sort of centralize that knowledge. So anybody who's onboarded could then already just, query that and just know what our company sizes are. Yep. Yeah. Go ahead.
So we know at this stage, we have a lot of interaction with the customer.
Mhm.
So as AI and customer, do you use AI more in that specific thing? Do you share, or do you ask them to join these sessions?
Yeah, so
They should join these sessions.
yeah, they'll join these sessions. So we'll typically have like a brainstorming session with them where we actually walk through this. So they'll it's kind of like an idea session where they'll talk through what actually it is they want, and we will in real time actually start building out models for it. A lot of it is for a wow factor too, to kind of show them you're software experts.
So then, how do you make sure when you train these agents, how are you making sure that you have a GPT inside them?
Yeah.
How do you make sure it doesn't lowball estimates?
So we still,
put it so high that the
Yeah,
customer runs away,
yeah, yeah.
you know?
So you'll still have, the human in the middle, and that's going to be a very common concept you're going to see with most AIs. There's going to be a human at some point along the line who's still approving on some sort of a workflow level. So you may have a lot of it generated by AI, but at the end, you're still giving your final sign off.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a fairly standard model you'll see with most generative things that are coming out. So the estimation is accurate just because we have everything so fine tuned as far as like for instance, we base our days off of capacity, so hours. So we'll say everybody can work an 8-hour day as an engineer, right? Have you heard of story points before?
This is a long conversation.
No, I can
I
make
know.
it brief. I can make it brief though. But have you heard of like story points before? So it's just basically a numeric concept. So like we as a company have established that we want 1 point to equate to 1 day of work. So if I can do 8 hours a day is 1 point for me, we will bill based on the point. So if I'm a 10-point engineer for a 2-week span of time, you can put a dollar amount on that. So if we estimate that a body of work is going to take 6 months, you have a number you can put on that. That makes sense? So we will usually plus or minus like X amount just to factor in some randomness that always happens, but it's fairly accurate.
It's not a direct interface, but this feeds into this.
It would be very simple to do if we ever wanted to.
We have many philosophical and religious arguments about story pointing and estimation and t-shirt sizes and developer days and focus factor and things along those lines, capabilities, features, functions. Let's pull that aside because we want to see some AI stuff. But we do use this to seed our backlog of work. We can use it to create stories. We can use it to create our artifacts. We can use it to create estimations, and then we can get into the actual work. And so it starts to write some of our code for us in creating data tables based on our data model or based on our domain model. And you can see it's not just creating the tables and putting that, assigning field sizes and types, but it also starts to put it in primary keys and foreign keys amongst those relationships as well, right? So we got the foreign keys, primary keys, things along those lines. And then we can also say, well, based on that data model, let's just stub out all those class files so that we're already getting ahead of the game in terms of what we want to build.
It's a lot of your boilerplate code done for you.
Yeah.
Which is where you save an enormous amount of time.
All right, I'm going to quickly get to the next slide before another question comes in. All right, so me being a business analyst, when I'm drawing a screen mock, this is a weather app. When I'm drawing a screen mock like this, I am literally going into Microsoft Paint or some other Visio or things along those lines, and I'm drawing this, right? This is a square box and another square box and a box with a dotted line around it, and I put some text and a search button. And this is literally a box with text on top of it, right? This is as crude as you can get by using the computer. But this platform we're using called TL Draw, the trick here is, TLDR, right? Too long, didn't read. Well, they just added an AW at the end. So it's TLDR AW, but TL Draw. And so you can just put a little note here. Again, this is a sticky that I said, user enters a zip code and clicks the search button. The app returns the city and state and the day and the weather forecast, blah, 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 highs and lows and sunsets and whatnot. And when you click make real, it goes and it creates that. Like, that's pretty close. I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's pretty close. In some regards, it looks better than my screen mock. And you're like, oh, that's just a drawing as well. You're like, no, I want to see the code for that. And it creates the HTML code. All right, so let's go do that. This is where the demo comes in. Maybe it's not going to work.
And has anybody done any front end development before? So some. I feel like I find that a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with it. So one of my favorite things that's coming out now is all of these tools to help you with front end development that makes your life a lot easier.
All right, you pause and talk when I'm actually hitting make real.
Go ahead.
You got to fill the filler. I want to show you that these are really just boxes. Okay, this is not fancy. Okay, and I'm just going to highlight all of this and I'm going to say make real. Now it's working, and now you can talk.
What?
Now you can talk.
You stopped me for that?
Now you can start. Look, I need to show that. Now you talk.
But as you can see, in real time, you're watching it get generated out, and you can actually take that and then put that into whatever you're working on, and now you have a screen. And I mean, there's going to be a little bit more to it because you're going to want to standardize how your screen layouts actually work. But typically, in the past, for anything like this, you're actually going to have some sort of like a UI, UX, or graphic designer who's actually going to be making all of your mocks for you. And you're going to be working directly with the client to gather requirements on kind of look and feel for what they want. So this streamlines it tremendously because you could be waiting weeks for months sometimes, depending on what you're working on.
This wasn't an exact, a great replication of it, frankly. It's putting these like 50 by 50 boxes. But nonetheless, we get the concept, right? If we had a little more time, I would just run it again. There's always some randomness to it. But now what I can do is I can click on this and I can actually double click on it and I can start manipulating it if I wanted to. It's an actual screen. And I can also go put it into a new tab. And it's now a screen that I can use. Now, it's not wired up to anything, right? It's just a screen mock, okay? But it is HTML. So it is full HTML that I can now give to Austin to go wire up to the backend, to weather APIs or something like that.
And the tool you're going to see right after this is what I think is the better version of TLDR Draw. So I'm excited for you to see it because this was one of the earlier ones that came out and before larger companies started coming in with their own implementations of it.
All right, so now our next one is, well, I guess I can just show you right there, is what if you just did it on a whiteboard? So I hadn't tried it on the whiteboard. I'd always used the drawing with the boxes and the text, and you're like, well, you're going kind of from computer to computer, right? Because it knows what that text is. It's not really looking at the text. It knows what those characters are, those ASCII characters. And so I grabbed a whiteboard and I started drawing what did I want to actually build from a screen standpoint. And you can see it's an old whiteboard. You know these whiteboards where you erase something and it like the markers doesn't totally erase. And so there's kind of like these smudges up here. And I wanted to also prove that my handwriting sucks. I wanted to prove that I could do something like an email and a group of radio buttons where you select one and the other ones unselect. I wanted a drop down. You can see I put in here drop down with options analyst, engineer, UX, and DevOps. Like, will it put it in there? I don't even know. Some multi-select checkboxes where your skills, check all that apply, AI, React, C#, SQL, whatever. And then I wanted the save button to be the default, and then I have a cancel button and then a profile picture. So I didn't know what I did. There's no instruction manual. I just kind of said, let me try this out and see if it works. And the first time I did, it actually worked. And I was amazed that the squiggle lines, it knew to put that in the dropdown. It knew those were comments and not like really part of it. So let's just go highlight this and then I'll run it and then Austin can talk while it's running.
Oh, you make it real? Yeah.
Make real. Oh, now you don't talk.
No, I got nothing for this one. I just got to see it. You get to see in real time. It take a whiteboard of, it's an okay drawing, Kevin. It's not that bad. And it was actually able to generate, what you'd want a potential screen mock to look like, right? Yeah, 2-3 seconds.
Let me open this new tab. So I can now type in there. I've got my email address. I got radio buttons that work. I've got a drop down, which has the drop down options. This is almost, it's so much better when you actually see it, right? Because it's not like a fake. It's not like I tried it 100 times. I'm just showing you the one time that it worked. We got the check boxes you can check, all the ones that apply. Got a profile picture upload. It looks like it messed up the default on the, no, actually it didn't. It moved them around, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
It put the save and you know what? I think that's a Microsoft convention that save is on the right. The default is on the right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's smarter than us.
So, and then, so you can also just, show the HTML here as well. Yeah, so you can see the drop downs here, right? So all that's pretty neat. And you can also, if you wanted to like modify it, you can put another note in a comment and then highlight this and highlight the other comment and then hit make real again. And it works off of the last version. So TL Draw and that's the company and their product is Make Real. You can see in the URL up there. Another one, if we wanted to look at prompts. So instead of drawing, we can make a prompt. And so this is a product called V0. Looks like VO, but it's V0. It's by a company called Vercel. Vercel is very good at making front ends. You probably use some of their templates and whatnot, but this is all just prompts. And so I put in a prompt, an application that manages venture capital funds, including funds, investors, and companies. This is kind of a riff off of the thing we did with the Chat GPT, our custom GPT. I now want to build a front end. I want to do screen mocks for that application that we were talking about earlier. That's all I put in, and I got this. I got a left nav with funds and investors and companies, which is the 3 things that I had there. And then it shows the funds, fund A, fund B, fund C, investor A, B, C, companies A, B, C. And it put in some detail here that I thought was really impressive. Like fund A has capital of 50 million, 75 million, and 100 million, which are reasonable numbers. It didn't put in $10. It didn't put in $1 billion. These are reasonable values for a venture capital fund.
Yeah.
And then I put performance and IRR. return on investments. And then for the investor, it put in different amounts. This investor has invested 10 million or 15 million, what their portfolio is, unrealized. It put in some really good information I hadn't even thought about. So I thought it was really neat.
Yeah, because it understands the context of investor and funds and companies, as well as a vague prompt was able to generate that.
And just for good measure, it said, or you could do it this way, or you could do it that way. They gave me 3 different options.
And V0 is one of my favorite tools because I think it's sort of a direct maturity product wise from what you just saw prior. So V0, has anybody worked with Next.js before? Yeah. Yeah. So Vercel is the company for Next.js. So V0, it actually will output code that you can directly copy and then use with any Next.js application, which is fantastic if you're working with Next.js because you can design all your screens here, literally copy your code, go right over there. And then Vercel also handles your deployments to AWS if you wanted to go into the cloud. So you have a whole toolkit literally right there, and it's very quick to use.
But let me hit go, then you talk, because this will take a few minutes. So I'm going to try to show it while we're here, and I just had to create an auto insurance website so that you're processing claims, accepting claims, comparing it to coverage, estimating reserves, getting repair estimates, etc. So it'll start thinking. Now ask your question.
Exactly.
I know, right?
Exactly. Because exactly, because I know a lot of
something embedding which I never knew. I don't even know yet.
Yep. It helps you, yeah. And then the best part too is with V0, it gives you the chat interface you're familiar with ChatGPT. So you can actually continuously update what you want them to be. And you have versioning up there as well. So if you don't like what it gave you, you can go back to a prior version and start from there. So I think V0 is one of the most impressive like UI mocking tools I've seen so far. Because the best part is you can drop pictures as well into this and it will give you a base application from there. So we use V0 almost every day.
Look what it's doing. It's creating the file structure that you're going to want in your code and creating the different pages for you.
Yeah.
With the code.
Yeah, this is what's really crazy because a lot of us underestimate. As far as we underestimate, this is a multi-page.
Yes.
Multi-logic between the pages. Even one of the pages has an ID. So you claim on the ID. See that ID? That's an ID that's passed on the URL in the page. It's just great. What's happening here is a solution out of the box.
Yeah.
You know?
And
Yeah.
and V0 is, since it's a larger company, it's being constantly updated. So even 6 months ago when I walked through V0, it's just continuously getting better and better and better. And V0 has a free tier. I'm not sure if you're on the free tier or the paid tier, Kevin, but you know, the free tier is already very impressive.
So you are on the free tier.
Is it? Yeah. So
Can you ask it for the people from Android? Can you ask it? Can you create an Android app? Can you an Android app?
sure, we'll see what it says. You might need to start a new chat or something.
Well, no, I can. I think the reason it's called V0 is because now I'm version 0 and I can go look at version 1, version 2. So here are the different pages they created. Cool. How about that? You see it's showing it in its own little browser here. Doesn't like that one.
But the main thing to know is it's scaffolded out your application, right? And just already having the routing done for you so you can click on the different pages and have it, you could then set that up as your base template and have other engineers then go in. Because I can tell you from experience, scaffolding out the initial parts of an application is so time consuming. I mean, we'll spend 2-3 weeks sometimes just on initial layout. Because the most important thing is if you don't scaffold your foundation correctly, every engineer who comes in after will just copy and paste what's already there. And that's how you end up with enormous problems down the road.
I have no idea if this will work,
I don't know.
but it'd be fun.
Go ahead.
So this is about the creation. Also, we know that in the future, really, the updates.
So
Do you use AI for that? Is it difficult for?
It's actually great. So I mean, it depends on how far back you're going with your coding, maybe not COBOL, but troubleshooting with existing code bases is actually really good. So being able to point to something and say, I'm getting an error at this whenever I do these things. If I click, then I get an error. Or if if a certain object type is causing an error, it's actually really good at troubleshooting those and figuring it out. And then proposing a fix. And once you get that fix proposed, it's kind of like a pull request. You can choose to accept that request.
But the most important thing I can say is you still have to know what to ask. So that's really where the knowledge of an engineer comes into play, because if you just throw it in there and don't know what to ask, that's where you get into trouble and get bad things generated for you.
So you have the configuration, the AI to create the software, and then it keeps updating it.
You're talking about the AI actually continuously updating it? Yeah, you
With the help of a
Yeah,
human, absolutely.
human.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
It gets to a point, and this is a little bit theoretical and a couple years down the road, but no one ever said, I want to write code. Like a business user never said, I want to invest money so I can write code. The business user says, I want to invest money so I can have an application that facilitates this, right? I want this process, business process or something like that. The code is a means to an end. And so whether you write the code manually or whether you have this write the code, you're getting the output that you want, which is ultimately the application that's running.
Yeah. And you're still having a human there who knows what they're doing, who's able to facilitate the process. So really all it's done is it's automated a lot of the really tedious boilerplate aspects of coding. Because a lot of the more complex tasks, I still have to go in and I still have to either help other engineers do it or give them some sort of foundation to do it. Because once again, if you don't know what to ask, you really can't get anywhere.
So it's never an obstacle. It's never an obstacle,
For what?
like generating the software using AI for the.
It can be like, I know some of the more junior engineers, they'll struggle with what to ask, or they don't really know how to word what they want. It's gotten a lot better with vague requests still getting you partially there. But I have had to come by plenty of times and help engineers be like, well, you need to kind of go more this route or this route, or they'll kind of, because hallucinations are still a real thing with the LLM. So if they get too far down a rabbit hole, they'll start getting nonsense responses. But all the LLMs are designed to give overly confident answers. So they don't understand that that the engineer themselves doesn't understand they're down a rabbit hole.
I've gotten into a loop sometimes where I have a bug, and so I said, help me fix this bug. I'm not a developer, so I don't really know what to do. But help me fix this bug. It says, oh, you need this code. I'm like, okay, go insert that code. Great, it'll help fix that bug. And then says something else is broken. I'm like, okay, we'll go fix that other thing. So you fix the other thing, and like the first thing's broken again. You're like, all right, well, Austin.
That's usually when he's peeking out his office, like, Austin, come help me.
But you know, this is when things go up, right? But if we electrically will go up, maybe 38,000. Right?
Mhm.
So basically,
Is that where you're dropping your phone from now? 30,000?
30,000?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
even though when it was in a hotel, I was checking in. He said second floor. I said, "Oh, second floor."
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah. So, if we go a little bit back, now we are creating the software developers of the future. Let's assume the software developers of the future. So now, what's the skill set they need now? Do they need to be able to? Of course, they need to be able to use these tools. There's no question. You know, or will be out of the picture. But what skill set do they open with an empty canvas, or now we want somebody who uses the tool, gives them something, tells the tool this button from here to here, and it moves it, and if it doesn't, maybe they can intervene. Or that becomes maybe a senior developer. Yes, but maybe a junior developer would be somebody who can talk to the tool and hold its hand and tell it, hey.
Yeah.
But it seems that it's changing.
We had this conversation just before you came in. Yeah. And that, I mean, do you want to, I know when I hire a developer, I no longer want to hire a developer and test their syntax. I'm assuming this will do a much better job with syntax than a human developer, right? Just like a robot that's creating cars. I want the robot that's doing laser welding. I don't want a human going there and freehanding it, right? I want it to be more precise. And Austin's going to show some of that, like the coding standards. But our developers now need to be more solution engineers. They need to be thinking broader level. And if we think of the old days where we had HTML and you didn't have editors, like you literally had to like open bracket and then put in your tags and things along those lines. And then there were text editors that made it a little bit easier and easier and easier and easier. And now you don't even think about HTML. You never write HTML. Yeah. Is that a problem? You need to know what it is and how you can troubleshoot it, but you don't want to write HTML anymore.
I think the biggest benefit too is it's really helped engineers upskill themselves a lot quicker. So with us being a consulting firm, it's very common to go in to have to use new languages and just act like you're an expert when you've really only written maybe a little bit of code in that language. But having AI tooling as long as I know fundamental aspects of coding, you're able to ask the right questions. And that's why syntax becomes irrelevant, right? Because you understand what you need to have done. So you understand when you actually have that code working, you understand why it's working. Instead of having to, browse Stack Overflow or Reddit or any other site trying to get some obscure example.
It did create your Android application. The downside is that, so
and
it
that
can't
makes
preview it, right? Yeah. All right, so let's go to the next.
And that is
the
one of
next
the
step.
only problems with V0. It's fantastic if you want to stay in the Vercel ecosystem, but unfortunately, that's just the problem. Companies are going to try to keep you in their realm. It's no different than Microsoft's trying to keep everything Copilot and
So Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is relatively new, they came out with something. First of all, when the 3.5 Sonnet model came out, it was much better than every other model. And in addition, it had this unique artifacts window. So most other things are adopting it now. GPT's got Canvas and whatnot. The idea is it's no longer I type and there's one big long chat. I'm scrolling all the way through this stuff, and it's updating stuff as I go, and I have to like scroll back up. Now you've got a chat window on the left and your artifact window on the right. And what this allows Claude to do is to actually show you what you've been building and hosting it. So you can start asking it questions and it shows you what it's building, and then you can ask more questions and it updates it. And so I wanted a component that would allow me to calculate retirement. So imagine you had a client like TIAA, which is an asset manager, and they said, I want a retirement calculator on my website. I want a React component on my website. And so with one prompt, and this is another one of those like, hey, let me just see if this would work. And I say, create interactive simulation. That's kind of the kicker, is interactive. That visually explains, I want to chart monthly after-tax income and retirement by allowing a user to use sliders, annual savings amount, and things along those lines. And it came up with this. And let's go look at it, because the neat part is that it is truly code that works. I'm not going to rerun it because I don't think there's much use in that, but you can see I did this just before you walked in, but I just said create it, and it comes up over here. I can see the code and I can actually use it. And as I use it, you can see that it's changing the chart down below. If I save more, and since I have 30 years to retirement, then 30 years out, my savings is going up and up and up. And then I go into retirement and I start pulling money out of my retirement fund. And so here's my after-tax income from that I'm taking every year. And so I can say, oh, well, you know what? If I saved $25,000 a year and I'm earning 8% before retirement, and then I only get 4% once I retire, and the inflation rate's 2.5%, and then I'm retiring in 20 years. You can figure all that stuff out, and it comes up and it updates this down below. This is a workable piece of code. This, like the weather app was not workable, right? The edit a person was not where it was just HTML, right? This is workable React code with formulas and a chart. And I can take that code and I can paste it on someone's website and just be done with it. Now, I would double check that the math works. I've not done that. I would do normal QC and functional things along those lines, functional testing. But pretty cool with a one sentence prompt, creating something I can put on someone's website. Even if I don't put it on their website, I know that if I'm working with like an analyst or a product owner at TIA, if I were to ask them what sort of retirement calculator they want, I'd be spending weeks understanding what they want to look like, what are the formulas, what happens when I move this slider back and forth, what do you want the chart to look like? I can just sit there with them in a few minutes and come up with what they want, and I've got the code and I can put it on their website. It's just a game changer.
And another thing too, if you're ever working in software consulting and you're dealing with clients, they never actually know what they want. So a lot of times being able to kind of show them, and you're able to kind of do it in like hey, what if it looks something like this? And they're like, oh yeah, exactly. That's what we wanted, right? And you can be like, yeah, it's your idea, not ours. And then you can kind of roll with it, right? And that's a very common strategy we have to employ all the time. But usually we would have to build out those solutions to show them. And now you can just quickly pull something up. Hey, you like this? And they go, ah, it looks great. And then you kind of just run it through, get mocks together, and then that becomes what you end up going forward. And that's kind of what I was talking about with saving time. And that ties back into the original stuff where we were talking about how do we estimate work. Because of things like this, we were able to estimate work faster and also charge less money for things because we can do them quicker. So that's kind of how it's evolved our industry, the largest, I would say.
ChatGPT has their own version of it. I mentioned Canvas, and so I did the same sort of prompt here. Claude uses React. That's their kind of the code they prefer to, the language they prefer to use. ChatGPT prefers to use Python. For interactive components, less great. For data analysis and visualization, much better. So, different uses for different models.
I've had a lot more success with Claude than GPT Canvas personally.
I put this into, because this is Python, I just opened a Jupyter notebook and put that into Python, or put the Python in there, and I came up with
That's always some of the funny things is now the different LLM companies are directly competing against each other. So you're seeing them all, like one comes out with a cool new feature, then the other one comes out with the same feature and they try to put their own spin on it. So it's funny because you get to kind of, as an engineer, you just kind of get to pick and choose which one is currently the best.
All right, so the last thing here is Cursor. How am I doing on time?
We're good.
Yeah, you only got 10 minutes. Cursor, you probably heard of GitHub Copilot. You probably used GitHub Copilot. It's helpful when like I've got an error or help me write this line of code, or it's a little more piecemeal. And so we started using Cursor 3-4 months ago.
Yeah, probably 3-4 months ago. Cursor kind of came out of nowhere.
It did come out of nowhere.
It's basically a direct replacement to Visual Studio Code. Sorry.
Yeah, VS Code. So there's some hype here. This is like an influencer, AI influencer, McKay Wrigley here. And you see this is August. This is kind of like what, 3 months ago?
Yes.
Did I do the math right? And he says we're at the point with AI code gen where Cursor plus Claude in the background, 3.5 Sonnet, is legit technical co-founder. What he's saying there is that you can have a startup that has a business co-founder and just Cursor, and that business co-founder could do a lot of the coding. Maybe not completely, okay? But that's a lot of hype. And then this guy, Andrej Karpathy, program is changing so fast and trying to VS Code Cursor at 3.5 Sonnet. And he says, over the last few days, most of my programming is now written in English, prompting and reviewing and editing to generate diffs, and doing a bit of half coding where you write the first chunk of the code you like, and then maybe comment a bit so the LLM knows what the plan is, and then tab through the completions. Like it proposes this, you hit tab. You proposes this, you hit tab. Proposes this, you hit tab. It's just tab. And for those that don't know who this guy is, Andrej, he served as a director of artificial intelligence and autopilot vision at Tesla, and he co-founded OpenAI. So kind of, I can accept his opinion. He went to Stanford as well. I mean, anyway, so McKay, remember we had that earlier. McKay showed this video how to write in complete back end with one prompt in 2 minutes. And so now you think that this is like a 1-sentence prompt, is actually a 250-line prompt. This is how I like to code. These are the packages I like to use. You could imagine giving this to your students and saying, this is what we want to go build. And then you just basically hit run, and it will build out the entire back end as you sit and watch. And he shows this in this video. If you want to look him up, it's definitely worthwhile watching a 4.5-minute video on that. And then at one of our lunch and learns, it was Frank, another one of our developers. He went and showed during a half-an-hour long lunch and learn of creating an entire app. Remember, we had this weather app. He went from start to finish of building the app. He did it in 30 minutes because he was trying to go slowly.
Yeah.
And explain everything. So let me talk to you about what Cursor is. And it was, I mean, he was done well within 30 minutes. But he did it using 10 prompts. I've watched the video a couple of times, 10 prompts. And these are the prompts that he would, I'm abbreviating just a little bit. So he maybe had a few more words than that, but not like sentences. So I'm not paraphrasing, I'm just slightly abbreviating. Create a new Django project, add a new app, add the app to the project, add a home page that uses a template, create a base template, uses Tailwind CSS, add a new screen called forecast, create a stylish 3-day weather app using V0, call the weather API.com, And I wanted to show, this is some of the examples of that it's creating. He literally is writing add a home page that uses a template. Not many abbreviations here, right? From these, I thought there were 10, there's just 8 prompts. He's doing things like this. He said, well, I used a very high-end, high-fidelity screen mock by drawing that on his notebook. Welcome, this is the best weather forecasting website on the internet. And using the other product that we saw, the TL Draw, it created this, which is pretty close, Weather Wizard, and this is the best weather forecasting app. And then he went to V0, and V0 gave him a much better view. You see how we're pulling this all together? And then it created all the files and all the code that you needed, and creating all the API. I think he would include a key for the API,
Key,
right?
Yep.
Um,
It's just a free weather API, so you
yeah.
just get keys.
So multiple edits in one file. So imagine you just say, I want to change this object. It'll say, oh, you've got 10 other objects. Do you want to go change it in all of them? Like, yes, please. And so it makes all those changes in one file. It can do multi-file edits. It shows the diffs, creates files up. You can upload photos. It's just amazing. And from all of this, I'm now, oh, imagine even updating the README. You always forget to update the README, right? Install this package. You always forget that part of the README. And so now Austin's going to go take over and show it. Yeah. Okay. Well, do you want to point? And now you need to share it too, right?
Yeah, I gotta share.
Okay. But my machine will be the mic. So, okay, you in your dark mode.
Got to. So anyways, so what I'm going to show you is sort of a rundown of what Cursor can actually do. So you've all used Copilot before, it sounded like. So I think Cursor is better than Copilot personally. So Cursor, it's built off of Visual Studio. So you'll notice it's actually its own IDE. And it has all of like the Copilot-ish functionalities built into it. But it's got a lot of other better features. So you can actually select which model you want to actually use with Cursor, and you're also able to define like your own custom rules for how you want it to generate your responses, which is really great. And a lot of the stuff is kind of built in very, very nicely into Cursor. So I'm going to show you 2 of the main components of it, one of which is just the basic chat editor, which you're going to be familiar with. The other is going to be the composer piece, which is what I think is the most impressive part of Cursor. So what we're first going to do is we're going to load up this Python file. So I had GPT generate me some really, really bad Python code. So what we're going to do is we're going to look through it, and you'll notice we just have, random globals declared. We've got just some random numbers added. Function names are terrible. We're just doing like some random, just really, really random stuff, right? So all we're going to do at the top is the hotkey is just Control L to chat. And you actually get history over here, a nice history of anything that you would have asked before in the past. So what you can do with cursors, you can reference which files you want it to have context for when you're writing your pieces. And you actually have down here, you can select which model you want to use. So if you wanted to be on a budget, you could use maybe one of the more mini models, or you could use Haiku, which is the cheaper Claude model. So we'll go ahead and go with Sonnet, because Sonnet, I think, is one of the most impressive ones. And we're going to say something as simple as just fix my code. And what you get to see over here on the right side, it gives you a detail of what it's actually doing. And then you just get to watch in real time as your code is being cleaned up for you, right? So you can see what it did. You can see a left to right difference on what actually happened. So what we did is we cleaned up our names up here. We actually added some classes. We added our imports up here. We tried to clean things up to make it better, right? We can go a step further. What you can also do is we could now say, hey, I've got this file that has some Python standards I want to follow, right? So we could go back over here and we could say, you know what? I want to actually ensure that they follow the standards that have been set in this file. So we can reference this and say, fix my code and keep it in line with these standards. Defined in. And you don't actually have to reference the file like this in your prompt. You could just say, fix my code again, and it will, for the most part, grab the standards. We're just being a little more explicit. So we'll say this, and you'll notice what it does is it refactors the code again, but you'll notice what it did is it actually took into account what we had in our standards. The biggest of which is it actually brought in a proper logger instead of just using print statements, because we had that defined in our standards that we wanted everything to be logged. You'll notice it actually tried to document what everything is doing, because that was another standard that we had defined. We're also actually using you'll notice up here, we're using the typing module so that we can actually declare what we want things to be. So we have, account number listed as an int. The reason it's doing that now is because in our standards, we explicitly stated that we wanted that to happen whenever we generated code. Now, what we can also do is we can go a step further, so we never even have to reference this Python standards. What you could do is you can actually copy this. You can go right over here into your cursor preferences. And here you'll notice you have rules for AI. So we could actually define exactly what we want every time we generate a response, a strict rule set we want it to go through before it generates any code for us. So think about if you had any strict requirements, or a lot of times when you're working in large enterprise projects, it's not uncommon for the corporation themselves to actually have code standards based on what you're working on. You could have them all defined here in the repository. So instead of having to constantly remember them as an engineer and constantly check people, which if you're approving pull requests, you're going to constantly be checking junior engineers on that. Hey, make sure you're following this standard, make sure you're writing it this way. You can just have this right here in your IDE. So whenever you're generating content, you're generating by your company's standards. So we're going to add this here, and we're just going to save it. And you could add whatever you wanted to. And I'm literally just copying and pasting a text file. And then now when you go back to your bad code, you don't even have to reference it. You could just say, fix my code again. And what it's going to do is, because now it's actually going through that, you'll notice it says, I'll help you improve this code following Python best practices, because it's following the rules you just defined for it. So you'll notice we get code that's very similar to what we just saw prior. You notice we have our logger up here, and we didn't have to explicitly say any of this because it's referencing our rules before any generation. So as you can see, it's a way to help if you're working in large collaborative efforts to keep your code clean and standardized between the different engineers.
Can you go to settings?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a file.
Yep. Yeah, so it's Yep. Yep, and it's a toggleable feature. So Cursor has a lot of really, really, really nice, in my opinion, very, very developer-friendly features in it that I have not found the Visual Studio Copilot to have. Copilot's getting there, but I think Microsoft released this thing's a little too early. So I think they're iterating on it constantly, and it's getting better and better. But the best thing is you could add whatever models you wanted to as well, and you can enable them or disable them. So if your company is say, hey, we only want to use Claude models, you could disable all these if you wanted to. Yep.
So this guy can embed it and specify that these stuff, whatever.
Yep.
And then it shows that if they use these, it will be applied by specific standard.
Exactly. So you could scaffold out how you want your repos or your repositories to be created from a base level like this, where you never even have to see it. So whenever it's generating code, it's following a strict set of rules, and you don't even have to know what those are.
So there's no, I said, I think also that the students come out of the class every week. It's fun.
Mhm.
Something new, like I have a page, and it becomes part of that.
Mhm.
So they come out of the class with a file that summarizes hopefully what they learned. And then that becomes migratable to them as a
So Cursor, I'm actually using this is the free version of Cursor, so I'm not paying for anything. And you're noticing I'm still able to use the model. So the free version of Cursor, it's still really good. The paid version is just even better. I think the paid version is the same price as a individual ChatGPT license. I think it's $19.99.
So can you run a local phone? Like if you have Olama, can you?
Yeah, I believe so. I haven't experimented that far with it, but I believe you can add whatever models you want to as well with the add model functionality, and you can basically reference what you want the model to be. I'm sure there's a tutorial to get Llama configured with it as well if you wanted to. It becomes free, and a lot of, yeah, and the biggest thing, a lot of companies are having like serious privacy concerns with the models. So there are some asks of like, hey, we want to self-host our own Llama model instead of, paying for GPT because we don't trust it, et cetera. So these are all things that you're going to be, readily facing. So the next thing I want to show is Composer. And I think Composer is one of the best features of Cursor. So basically what you do is you have a markdown file here, right? And this is going to, what you just witnessed with the PowerPoint, where you actually got to see the commands being used to generate the weather app. This is going to be all those commands just put into a markdown format, and it's just in a single file, right? So what you're actually doing here is you're just giving it some steps on what you want it to actually do. And the biggest thing you're going to notice here is there's no code. It's just English language written. You're giving it some clearly defined steps on what you want it to do, right? So you still, once again, the core concept here is you still have to understand what you're looking at. That's the biggest thing to know. You're not just being completely replaced by an AI tool. It's kind of working with you to assist you in the process. So got some stuff down here on what we want: the base template, landing page, forecast page, views. The only thing we actually have here is we do have a JSON structure for the response that's going to come back from our weather API. That's just so it knows what it will look like. And then we have some stuff down here for error handling. And then finally, we say that we wanted to update our README at the end. So that being said, all you have to do is open up our Composer window. So what we're going to do is we have our Composer window. We're going to go ahead and reference our layout. And all this is just an HTML layout giving us some sort of a baseline and our instructions. That's it. And we're going to say, create the app. And what you're going to see a right panel show up. And what it's doing is it's actually, you're watching it write all of your code and all of your files in real time over here on the left. And what's cool about this is this is kind of where the human in the loop comes into play, right? So you're actually getting to see what's succeeding and what's failing. So this is kind of where you're going to have to actually go in and see, why did this fail? Was there a conflict? Because what it could do is this can actually go in and rewrite files that already have code in them. So over here on the right, you actually get to see in real time the different steps it's running to. And these are steps that you defined in your markdown. So all these steps that you're seeing: create the form, create the base template. These are the headers that you saw on that markdown file. So you get to watch it kind of go down. And any of these ones with X's, we're going to have to go and review. So there might not be anything wrong with it. They just need a human to say, yes, this is acceptable code. So as this is going down the line, we're now on the README. So you're watching this get generated last. Just got to wait for the last views to finish. But what you can do is you can actually go through and you can just start playing around with this stuff while it's still generating whatever it needed to do. So I could say, okay, this looks fine. Let me go ahead and say that's good. Let me apply that. I could say this form looks fine. Let me apply that. I could say, this base HTML file, this looks fine. Let me go ahead and apply that. But you kind of see where the engineer comes into play. You still have to know what you're looking at. And the best part is I could click on these individual files, and over here on the right, I could literally reference just this file and then make edits to this file before I actually apply everything. So it gives you a nice sort of, this is what I could have, and I can actually change the files in real time. So I'll go ahead and reapply that, reapply that, reapply that.
This is where you just hit tab too. That's a,
yeah.
It's a foreshadowing to my last slide.
Of course, in the live demo, the views seems to be having trouble. But we can go ahead and reapply.
We could blame the internet.
We can blame the internet, yes. Okay, so we have everything done now, and you notice everything's green, so because we accepted all the changes. So if any of you have ever, merged code before in a repository, this is going to be very familiar to you. When you're merging in, you actually get to see what it's generating, and you kind of get to go through here, and you could say, I don't actually want this, and you could hand edit this if you needed to. So if it generated something incorrect, you can make the change there. So we'll go ahead and say we want to accept all of this. We'll close out of this. So we now have a populated weather wizard project over here. And we actually, in blue, you get to see all the files that were updated over here, right? So last thing we need to do is we just need to add, because it generated an environment variable file for us, we just need to add in our weather API key. Now don't steal my free weather API key. You're not going to get much value out of it. But we're going to go ahead and save that. And we're going to go into our terminal. We're going to go into our weather directory. And then all we're going to do is we're going to run our Python server. Going to click this. And we have our application right here, all written with Composer. It's got a nice little light mode, dark mode. We're able to say, let's get a 3-day forecast. Let's throw in this zip code. And bam, we get our weather back just like that. All built from a 50, 60 line markdown instruction. Yep. That's it. And Cursor's really good at scaffolding at the beginning, but projects that are already very, very far along, you can use it to generate new files for you as well. But it saves you a tremendous amount of time, as you can imagine, because the Composer piece, it actually saves your history as well. So you can create new, and you can have multiple different composers that you could run. So say you have something, some boilerplate for like, how do you grab data from a database? That could be a boilerplate that your company has, and you could just, when you're spinning up a new project, go in there, run the composer for it, and it just makes all your boilerplate stuff for you. And it can follow all your rules that you want as well. That's all I got for that. Is there any questions on that? All right.
All right, so
No, so I have it specifically geared towards Python in my instructions, but you could, whatever languages you would use Visual Studio for, it'd be the same thing with Cursor. Yeah, oh yeah. So it's got
hold on, I unshared, sorry.
up here these extensions. This is like practically a fork off of Visual Studio Code. So anything you've seen in Visual Studio Code, you're going to have here. It's moved a couple things around, but like source control is up here, search is the same. Extensions are the same. Yeah. I think that was the end of the. That was the end of the.
Can you stop sharing?
Mhm.
I will share.
I got to give you the issue, my bad.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sharing.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side. My
Oh.
HTML is over there.
How we gonna-
So I'll just move over. But this is just the very end.
Yeah.
So my final joke here is we go back to Andres Karpathy again. And this was his post. The future be like tab, tab, tab.
Yep.
Like, I'm just gonna accept the code. I heard a joke years and years ago where when robots were taking over factories and whatnot, and someone says, I want a factory with 100 robots, a guy, and a dog. And you're like, well, why the guy and the dog? You're like, well, I want the dog to make sure the guy doesn't touch the robots. So it's the same sort of thing. Like, we're getting to a point where I don't want someone hand coding this. I want them to use the standards and the AI to code it, and then someone review it. And if it's not right, I don't want them to go fix it because they might miss a semicolon. I want them to use the AI to fix it, right? And then when we check it in, I probably want to use some sniffers as well for security and SQL injection and stuff like that, right? So I kind of don't want human coded applications anymore. Not today, maybe, but in the very, very, very near future.
Yeah.
So we got.
There we go.
Do you have time for Q&A, or I mean, we're kind of way a little over, but
Sit down if you want to sit down.
that's fine. It's all good.
And so any questions? Okay, I have two questions. Maybe two simple questions. I think I asked one of them during the talk.
Is your camera still on?
It's still, I think so. It didn't fall from the 7th floor. Yes, it's still. Probably it's very hot, but the first question is, I asked him during the talk, what's the future? From specifically computer scientists, new computer scientists coming to the market, what do they have to do? Do they have to, of course, they have to be versed in these tools, but from your perspective, what should they do?
I think you still definitely, if you want to be a software engineer, you still have to know how to program for sure. I can tell you right now, like reviewing pull requests from purely like GPT written code versus someone who used GPT as an assistant and then made the modifications they needed to is like night and day. The biggest thing you'll see is, especially with Python, is you can tell because you'll see the same imports like 3 different times on a file because they're just copying and pasting. So you still have to have that deep knowledge. I actually think I find myself having to have a deeper knowledge now than I did a few years ago, because now more than ever, you have to know what you're looking at. Because instead of, when you're writing your own code, you know what you're writing because you've spent so long on it. But when you're copying and pasting, you still have to be able to look at it and understand like what it's actually doing, right? And when you're going through the painstaking process of debugging different pieces as you write it, you kind of learn what it's doing. So that's definitely been a bigger challenge, especially on like the junior entry level. So I would say you still have to have that deep knowledge. Yeah. And I would definitely encourage like side projects too, for sure, outside of regular coursework.
I found that, not that I'm a coder, but I found that if I asked two developers to go code the same functionality, we would get two different approaches. They're both right. Maybe it's preference, maybe it's how you were taught, but they might be a little bit different. There's many ways to skin a cat. And so what I struggle is where I'm looking at a piece of code, I'm trying to make it work, and I'm getting feedback from an AI that tells me to go a different approach. And now I've got part of the old approach, part of the new approach, and it's never really working out. And so that's where I, as a non-developer, just struggle. And as I call in Austin again, so you can't fake it. I just fake it, and I can't. I can get 80%. I can do some cool gee whiz bang stuff, but I'm not building enterprise quality applications.
I would say the future is you still need the same skills
Yeah.
that you had 5-10 years ago. It's just you now they've kind of moved towards like you have the same skills, but you also have a really handy tool that can just help you be more efficient.
You saw how you like see the coding standards things like that into the cursor. What about how do you handle seeding information in database structures that are external to your application, not doing it expense?
But well, so that's the thing with the rules. Like you could still set a standard. So like how deep are you wanting to go on that question? Like, are you wanting to know like, you know, if your company has a standard for, you know, what are you using for like your database design? Like, are you?
And can't your ORM handle a lot of that?
Well, because like the question is like are you?
If you have API structure, API also multiple projects that might not like us, whatever. The open source is the structure of it, like that. Getting those API calls to
I got you. You're saying like, how do you handle when you're not really sure what the shape of the data is?
or a system way to tell the model.
Yeah. That's where the human involvement comes in. That's kind of what I meant about how you're not being replaced at all. Like you still have to have a deep knowledge because it knows what it knows, right? Like think about it. I think of the way of like when people ask me like how should they be prompting things, I say prompt it exactly how you would ask me the question, right? So if you don't know yourself, there's no way the LLM's going to know, right? So what do you have to do? You have to go and investigate and figure out, and that's kind of where your skill as an engineer really shines, sort of that deep dive into what you need to do, because the LLM's never going to know that because it needs context, right?
Did you have to change the process for you process potential engineers regarding?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was with the recent with us being acquired recently, we haven't done a whole lot of hiring. But I will say it was definitely something we would talk about because the biggest one was on the coding assessments. We definitely had to check time spent on problems. That was a big one because if it was like a pretty complex problem and it was like 30 seconds, it was done. You're like, okay, I don't think you actually did the problem. So a lot of the things that I wouldn't typically have to look at, I started having to look at. Because we had a candidate maybe 3 or 4 months ago who was working for towards like a C# position. And that's what we looked for. Like she was taking, 20+ minutes on problems. And like some of them, you can actually, some of the tools that they'll use during that process, you can actually see them, like you'll see, it's like a recording. So I can actually see in the 20 minutes, they've actually been typing things out. So you can tell it's not just copy and paste. Because that used to be the classic is you would see, it'd be 20 minutes, but it would just be a blank video until the 20th minute. And then all of a sudden a big blob of code would appear. Yeah. So you're still looking for the same things. You're looking for if they did it in 30 seconds or not. Yeah.
The other thing that I'm kind of looking for, and not necessarily proficiency in the AI, but interest in it. We have every 3 months or so, we allow our teammates to go through a hone your craft period. Go improve your skill set. We usually have a team go do it. And that team will come up, we usually give an AI project or a list of projects they can pick from, and they'll go do something. Some people raise their hand and say, I just want to get a certification in Azure or something like that. And like, it seems very old school, right? So part of that, it's not a bad thing as much as kind of like fighting the last war. I want someone that is going to embrace these new technologies and understand how they can be leveraged, as opposed to, but this is what I've always known. Now, it's not so much for younger engineers. I think they're all really interested in it. They've quickly adopted it, but older engineers, more experienced engineers, have always done it this way. You know that type. So,
And also to further out of your question, I would say the one thing I look for too is just to be open-minded to it, because I know we have had a little adversity with oh, this is stupid, I don't want to use this isn't going to replace coding, and like, you know, I'd say 2 years ago when it was kind of really coming out, like with the ChatGPT concepts, maybe that was a little more fair when the context windows were much smaller, but it's gotten to the point now where it's so integrated and it's gotten so much better that I think it's almost a necessity. So I would say just be open-minded to it, because if you're not going to be open-minded to it, I think you have to like be able to come in and keep up with people who are, which is going to be very challenging.
Curious how AI has changed your relationship with clients. And naturally, when you deliver a project, there's a lot of checkpoints and whatnot. How has the increased pace made your clients feel, and how have you guys approached?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, we actually had to kind of change our offering structure. So when it all came out, like when I was talking about the discovery process, we usually go through at the beginning of a software build. It could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And the biggest problem we were running into with a lot of clients was, this is going to take 2 years to build or 2.5 years to build. So we actually had to come up with faster offerings. So we actually started coming up with sort of like an AI lab concept, which was an 8 to 12 week engagement. So you would actually do the discovery period in 2 weeks and then spend 6 weeks actually building like a working prototype so that they could then feel more comfortable. Because I would say after COVID too, people were a lot more apprehensive to spend top dollar on software builds. So it was kind of a way to use that to gain confidence and also show them you're giving them a viable product. But it also let us, that prototype made us have a much better estimation of what the full software build would look like, which was most of the time cut in half. I mean, we built an app for a barbershop chain recently that took us 9 months, and we had the full body of work done in like 4 months. And that was like, we didn't think that was going to happen. We thought it was going to take the full 9 months, and it took 4 months, and we were like, oh crap, like, what do we do for 5 months? Like, so we were able to deliver more work for them. I think we delivered like 40% more work than we were originally contracted.
So there's
Mhm. Well,
the reason. So opposed to the. And then.
didn't you go do it, business manager? Yeah.
And we screw up.
Yeah.
So this needs to be. So then, relationship, but the end of the charge with. I think do your math. He said it's 4 days.
Yeah.
But that was, so we learned from that engagement.
yeah, that was a learning experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like we're not doing that all the time, right? That was oh geez, like we got done really, really fast.
It was like an eye opener for us, because that was finishing early is like that's usually never what ends up happening with your software builds. Usually you're doing your best to finish on time. Like if you're within a 5% ratio, you're doing great. Right.
So we have this, we now call it AI assisted software delivery, which makes us go faster. And we've had to adjust our points, what we call a point. And if we elaborate a little bit what Austin was saying earlier when I shut him down, is
Yeah, what the hell?
there's input-based pricing and output-based pricing. Input is how many hours. So how many hours is Austin going to work on this? Well, it behooves Austin to like What do you think of this screenshot? What do you think of this screenshot? Let's code it this way. Let's refactor the code. It behooves him to spend as many hours as he can. I
Mhm.
mean, as long as the client will still pay. But he has no incentive to finish it. He has no incentive to use tools to help him finish faster. That's an input-based model. An output-based model is how many points? We think this application, we do the work breakdown structure, we think this will take 300 points. And a point is approximately a mid-level developer a day. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just using a thumb in the wind kind of a thing. Now, Austin can get that done in less than a day, that 1 point, because Austin is a high-end developer. I would struggle to get that same thing done in 3 days. So we're taking the average. So if I can then have one average developer deliver a point a day over 2 weeks, we're giving 10 points of work. It's the average developer, 10 points for the work per iteration. Austin can do 14, I can do 6. That's why Austin gets paid twice as much. Just because he's delivering 14, I'm getting paid 6. But now we need to rescale or recalibrate our scale as to what's the point. So we used to think, well, building that screen is going to take 2 days. So that's 2 points. And now the screen's like,
You build it in 30
maybe
minutes.
it's a half a point
Yeah.
because I can just get it done. I can get someone to review it.
You feed in some half-baked requirements and get, fully working screens in like 30 minutes. Yeah.
So now we have to recalibrate how long will we think that would take.
And that brings us to the point of people asking, will people lose their jobs because of GPT? Maybe they don't lose their jobs, but instead of charging 100 points, you charge 100 points. So there are less people working hours on it because there is assisted GPT. So then the team size would possibly shrink, right? Because there are people sitting on the bench that are not getting these hours, unless you are Superman getting all these clients to.
Well, so let's pull that thread a little bit. So a weather app, as we just built in a minute, is not pushing the boundaries of cutting edge technology, right? It is a weather app connecting to an API that has publicly available. It's very straightforward as to what it's doing, right? And so if we look at using AI to build software, AI-enabled software development, that's one aspect to it. What we give to the client ultimately has no AI in it. That weather app has no AI in it. We use AI to create it, but as itself, as a code base, has no AI components to it.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is relatively easy to go build. But now if you say, let's embed AI into your solutions, so we might use AI to go build solutions, and the solutions also include AI. Now you're getting to some cutting edge technology. That's where we're spending more of our efforts. And so in this example of the hair salon or whatever it is, the barbershop, we're like, we built your basic app where you've got your point of sale, you've got your appointments and your reservations and all the good stuff. We built all that, and that there's no AI in that. Now, could we take the extra time that we contracted you with and say, let's start optimizing who should be mapped with which person? You're a customer and they have a certain type of hair and they have a certain interest in what they want for the style, and then map it with a barber that has the skill sets. And maybe we take a picture of them and figure out what the hairdo would look like in a new style. So all of a sudden we can now start doing things that are higher end, leveraging new technologies.
Yeah. And it was a fixed cost build. So we were just at the end of the day able to just deliver more, which nobody's going to be unhappy with, right? What's up? Yeah, it just increases your productivity. Yep.
How would you get inspiration for that additional 40% of productivity using the barber example? Do you go to like competitor websites and see the kind of stuff that they're doing?
Well, so thankfully the initial thing we were building for him was very much an MVP. So we were kind of able to take it past that because we were actually never going to go live in production. He was actually in the process of bringing on a fractional CTO to kind of assist him with getting that next stage. So because we were able to already get him to an MVP level, we were then able to go this step further and actually get him running in his barbershops, going through like a pilot program for him. So we were kind of able to drive him through an even farther process. So thankfully he had a large body of work that he still wanted done. Yeah. Otherwise, yes, we would have had to have probably gone through another sort of discovery process to see what else he wanted. Sorry, I think it is.
A personal problem.
Oh, well. So I pause
We'll see if we can help you. Yeah.
Technical records, right? Containing technical records. Developers don't want to write documentation.
Yes.
using these more integrated style programs like the person,
Mhm.
do you automate the documentation process?
Mhm. Yeah. So like, are you talking about like documentation, like on your actual?
Use a website, for example.
Sure. So are you talking about like actually documenting what your code is doing, or actually having like documentation how to use an API kind of?
Like
Or your end user.
Copilot did a great job of documenting code itself, but actually user facing or
Mhm.
support documentation on troubleshooting.
There's a lot of stuff now where you can actually connect, like you'll see a lot of sites now, they'll have like a wiki where it almost acts as like a README for the repo, but then that itself is the front facing site. So when you actually navigate to that, like you'll, I can't think of a good example. Have you heard of LangChain? LangChain had something like that. I can't remember some of the other ones, but it's where you're actually just like updating like your README for your repository, but then that itself is a accessible sort of documentation you can go through. I don't have a good example off the top of my head, but I've seen that before, but I haven't really used AI for any of that.
You bring up a good point because I've not used it for user manuals, user guides, which might turn into an operations manual, things along those lines. But the next big thing coming up are these, not just an LLM that is providing you content, but actually performing a task, right? These agents or agentic. So that's where you're gonna need user manuals to figure out, okay, think of like an airlines where you might need to go to an LLM to figure out, okay, someone's changing their flight, the $75 change fee, can I waive it? Are they based on the ticket that they bought, or based on a weather event, you're allowed to waive it, or their preferred whatever, so you can waive it. So you have to go to the policy to figure out whether you can actually waive it. But then that service rep has to go actually waive it. And these platforms can be really complicated. How do I waive it? And so that's where these agent bots can go start doing those things. And that's just coming online right now.
Yeah.
But those agent bots would need to know how to do that in the platform. And so I would be less concerned about showing a service rep how to go do it in the system. I'd want to bypass that and just have the system go do it. So I kind of want a service rep to say, can I waive this fee? Yes or no? And like, oh yeah, I can because of this policy, and then say, go waive it. Human in the loop kind of a thing.
Yeah. And
so that's new. That's all coming out right now.
And another more increasingly popular thing too is actually indexing your documentation and then being able to have like a natural language search against it. So you're just typing like, hey, how do I use this functionality? And it's literally, have you heard of like vector databases? Have you explored in that? Yeah. So that kind of concept where you're basically searching against the documentation and it's able to give you back, like you just type like, I want to know how to use this functionality. And it's basically giving you back like a human way of like, this is what you would do, right? So to give you use cases from a documentation. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I have the same question regarding cursor. You have a set of instructions to the instructions are not that big. But if you are a very large organization, like said, large set of instructions posted on your URL. So does provide that facility to actually go through that whole bunch of thousands of lines of commands and then
I imagine if you were scaling, you would have them broken out into separate, like that's kind of what I was talking about with having like separate composers. So you could have like separate things that are doing very specific things, and then you could just run them and they're just going to generate all your stuff for you. So you could kind of orchestrate.
know in which composer to refer
Yeah, so that's the thing. You can add which files you want it to reference.
I might not want to give the exact pointer to that particular composer. I want the model to choose from a set of 100 composers to get that 77 composer.
Yeah, you use the rank stuff,
That might, I mean, that's probably, I don't think Cursor is enterprise yet because it only came out like 3 months ago.
Yeah, Cursor is still very new. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, they've raised a ton of money. I think they've raised like $400 million or something like that. So Composer's the newest thing they've come out with. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's how they end up trying to scale it. Yeah,
I think Composer though, what you're saying is that if I'm writing in React, I might use this Composer. If I'm writing in
Exactly.
Python, I might use this Composer.
Exactly, because
Different coding
they
standards.
let you define you can have hundreds of composers if you wanted to, and you could have them be unique to your different repositories you're using. Yeah.
So what is the impact of these tools on the version control systems? So back in time, we used to push for functionality, so we can roll back. Push like a big chunk of code, or is that? How do you see?
You're talking about like source control with coding in general? Yeah, so typically it depends on what system you're working in, but a lot of enterprises will use sort of like an agile methodology, if you're familiar with that. So you basically break your work down from like an epic feature story level. So like an epic will usually be like a massive milestone, like I don't know, something like build this, right? It might be like build chat functionality. And then you have features that are the higher level components of that chat functionality, but not quite at the epic level. And then you'll break those features down even further to a story level, which will be very small subsets that need to be of code that need to be done to translate up to the various requirements. So you would basically have small pieces of code that you're doing. So you're not usually pushing like a massive amount of code. You'll have engineers working on different stories at the same time.
So you use
Well,
AI on the story level, not the entire project.
Well, so you would use AI. You could use AI in general on anything. You could use it to actually write the stories for you, or you could use it to assist you with the individual story if you wanted to, like from a code perspective. Does that answer your question?
Let me make sure I understand it. So I think what we're saying is like, we just build a whole lot of code there in a minute. And to check all that in at once doesn't allow you to like roll back in small
Well,
little
you-
chunks, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But-
you
but-
could. I mean, that's the whole concept of source control. So you could commit whatever you wanted to, and then if something ended up not working, you could roll back individual pieces if you needed to. Yeah.
Is it best practice to divide it and push portions of code, or you?
Yeah, you would usually want to push smaller portions of code. Yeah. So it depends on the company. Some companies will like they'll operate on like a feature branch level. So they'll actually be you're developing a feature, and then that feature might be what you're deploying. There's a ton of strategies. That's a very big conversation. Yes. But we've always tried to push smaller pieces of code just for that exact reason. Because when you're working with clients, like if you push code out that's a faulty deploy and you need to roll something back, you don't want to have to scour through hundreds of files.
I'll make one question. Maybe it's the same.
One last one.
Like just with AI or like in general? I think the largest one in recent times has been it's a 22 project C# solution that I've been running AI against.
Remember, AI is just proposing changes.
Yeah, and I would say simultaneously, but I mean using it to assist in the individual.
Lines of code he wants to know.
I mean, like thousands, like tens of thousands.
These are big enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, these would be big enterprise. Like the 22 project what I'm talking about is like probably hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Yeah, so it would just have it in context, but it's only looking for whatever it needs. So if I'm like trying to do something within a project, it's gonna most like you can. I know Copilot. I think they just came out with where you can reference like on a repository level. So you could either reference at a repository level. You can get very small if you wanted to.
Yeah, but he's talking about context. His context is defined inside the IDE.
Yes.
Inside the project itself.
Yes.
That becomes his context.
Yes.
But Copilot allows you to branch out of the project itself. It's still in the making.
Yeah.
Every day you go to the IDE, there's a new version of.
Yeah, it's a newer piece that came out, being able to reference the entire repository, which.
Yeah, integration is very easy. I think that integration is probably the least concern, because integration already you have a predefined pipeline that you will go through.
Yeah.
Right? So,
And you're never really needing to reference as much as you're probably thinking you are, right?
I have one last question.
Sure.
Yep.
Go ahead.
It's your prerogative, right? Yep.
But it's going to be very relative. And from the academic point of view, what do you guys recommend that we do so that we can prepare people better that come out? Because that's something that at least myself and a lot of my colleagues are hitting our heads,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how can we make these kids more successful, and what kind of, yes, we know that we need to talk about AI. We need to fundamentally change how we teach, because you said you don't want people who you don't want to waste time on syntax, you know. And I agree with you completely, you know. But what should we do? You know, maybe words of wisdom from your side or from your other side, or you are on the other side of the aisle, right? You are the industry and so on. What should we do to enhance the product that we are creating, which is education and students?
Me personally, I think it's just building software from the ground up. Like if you want to be a software engineer and you want to build projects, it would definitely be understanding like how do you literally load up an IDE and from start to finish create some sort of user facing portion and the backend facing portion all the way down to the database level. Because if you don't have that basic knowledge, that's where you'll struggle the hardest when you get your first job. Especially because like it depends on how large the company is, but if you get like inherit some legacy application, it's a headache because you'll go through all sorts of things. You'll have no idea how to run the app, like even like debugging, right? Like there's just so many things to it that you just won't be prepared for. It depends on what you're working with. Because if you're focused on like a lot of coding problems, like the classic, like, oh, let's reverse a string, and like those are just you're never going to use that.
So the required skill set from the students still the same?
Do I know?
There's more hands-on.
Yeah, more hands-on. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, more hands-on. Like, because if you, it's a very technical field, right? I mean, think of it like if you went to go be an auto mechanic and you'd only learned about the theory of cars instead of actually working with a car, right?
No, but this changed. We might be at a conflict here because this changed. I can go watch a YouTube video, know how to change the brakes on my car, or watch a YouTube video, know how to change the oil on my car. It just takes one screw to take it off, and the oil comes out of the car. So basically, there are some skills.
There are skills
that you can learn like this, right?
Yeah.
But what makes, I think, software development difficult is the concept that you build upon what you learned before, and that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's why math is not very popular. Because kids, after they start learning multiplication, the sky falls. The sky really falls. You lose these kids. After third grade or fourth grade, these kids are in la la land because the foundation is very weak. They never sat down to learn the multiplication table.
Yeah.
And you are building on top of it division. They are completely on Mars. You are on Mars. You're
on Mars. Okay.
It's the same thing with coding. I think the problem with coding, at least how it's being taught, is that it is a compilation of small units that you take to build until you reach to that level where you build a front end, back end.
Yes.
So we lose
It's piecemeal.
But the car and a lot of the crafts, as long as it's simple crafts, like it becomes very similar to reversing a string or sorting a string. It becomes a very simple. Even a lot of websites classify them. If you look at iFixit, for example, to fix any electronics, they rank them. Rank the how hard it is to do the task, easy, medium, right? To some extent. But what makes coding difficult is this interconnection between the concepts.
Well, because to go further on that, I mean, coding tends to be the easiest part of the job, right? So what he's getting at with the interconnecting, like, how is what I'm writing impacting things on a holistic view, right? Because you might write something that works. That doesn't mean it's good, right? Like it could be good from a small level, but how's that going to impact 2 months down the road or 3 months down the road or 8 months down the road, right? So like, yeah, that's where a lot of like the software design comes into play. And like, as you go from like junior, mid-level, senior, that's where that becomes more and more imperative.
I would definitely embrace the AI though.
Me too.
Yeah, and embrace the AI too.
If kids are coming out of CS programs and not knowing AI, it's going to be a big challenge.
It's tough. Yeah, it's very tough.
Social science perspective. You were talking about a bit. So, in comprehensive coding, positions that you say look for success, in kind of way back the character that be successful.
Problem solving.
Problem solving.
That's literally problem solving. You could come in and know absolutely nothing about coding, but if you can solve problems, you're going to get it.
Yes.
There's definitely a mind for it. And I would say the harder thing to work with for like a junior engineer is like, if you don't have that innate mind for it, and you kind of have to kind of craft that, that's usually where the more mentorship challenge comes from. But like, we've had some interns that have come in that know like nothing about coding, but they were so good at problem solving that they were able to just kind of get themselves there from, not even from a coding perspective, but just from like they're able to talk out a problem. And now they're able to use AI tooling to, write in natural language what they want to do. And then they're able to get the syntax. That's why we were talking about how the syntax isn't as important anymore. Yep.
And you have two very interesting examples. You have this guy on steroids, the software developer, right? and you have the manager on steroids who can understand exactly what you want, translate it into some kind of tasks that he can pass on to him and get the money out, get the money into the company. That's basically, yeah, that's basically it. That's basically what they're doing. And that's on steroids, of course, right? So basically, when you look at students, you're trying to drag them to, okay, please problem solve.
Yeah.
Please, right? And again, it's just a challenge. I think it's a really interesting challenge, but
Because before we got acquired by the recent company, I was acting as our director of software engineering. So the bigger thing that I was doing was like, how do I take our teams and make them work faster, make them work better? Because we had very, very specific staffing models. We would do usually 3 engineers to 2 business analysts. The analysts are gathering requirements, the engineers are coding whatever the requirements are. But with AI tooling, we were able to do teams of like 4 engineers and 1 analyst. So we kind of got to experiment with all different flows. So that was a challenge too, from a higher level. Yeah. Not a whole lot.
We do more behavioral driven development, BDD.
Yeah.
You find yourself having to spend more time on unit test coverage.
Not really, because but before, when like ChatGPT was in the earlier stages, like yes, because the context, like the content you would get produced was not super great. But as the models have gotten better and better and better, I have to spend less time actually tweaking code. And I'm usually, now that I'm able to like reference my different code pieces, I can get it to write tests for me while I'm actually coding. So I didn't show there's another example that goes further with the one that I showed you with Cursor, where you actually then go and generate the test for the code you just generated.
It scared me.
Yeah.
Is it testing what it needs to be tested?
Yeah, it does. It does. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Because if
Now
you,
the fox is in the hen house,
Oh,
isn't it?
yeah,
Right.
the other thing too is when
Yeah.
you get in like a really big enterprise like level piece of software, things become just redundant with the patterns that a lot of your unit tests, anyways, when they're already established, become very copy and paste heavy. Your integration tests get a little more involved, but your unit tests are very cut and dry.
I developed a team, so it's more time right to test rather than-
Yes.
Yeah.
That could be another conversation we can have, but yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, I think they will be here for a couple of minutes. You know, I don't think.
As we pack up. I do have to get back to my conference. I didn't wear the
Thank
suit
you
for
so much.
nothing.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.